I'm Doug Stone, Scout Executive for the Indian Waters Council, Boy Scouts of America. Welcome to the Soup, Stone Soup, where we dish out ideas and hopefully inspiration to help keep you plugged in to scouting. I'm thrilled today to be joined by the great-grandson of the first Chief Scout Executive of the Boy Scouts of America. His name is Brett West, and his great-grandfather was James E. West. And I'm going to ask Brett some questions about the legacy of scouting and what his hopes and aspirations are for the future of the organization. So, Brett, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, Doug, it's so great to see you. Gosh, it's been a long time since we've been together. And congratulations on Stone Soup. What a terrific idea. And I hope it works out great for you. And thank you for inviting me on one of your very first shows.
Well, Brett, you and I were friends in college, and when I learned that you were related and so directly to one of the founders of Scouting, it really was pretty neat. And I've enjoyed hearing about your family connection to the organization. Tell us a little about that.
Well, so just to give you the lineage, so I'm Brett West, and I'm in my 50s. My father, his name is James E. West as well, as is my brother who was the firstborn in our family. I was second. They're both James E. West. But anyway, so you have me, you have my father, James E. West, and his father is Arthur West, who's my grandfather. And then Arthur West's father is the James E. West, who founded, the first Chief Scout Executive of the Boy Scouts. And I happen to have a photo of James E. West right here. I'll pull it up. So I don't know if there's any resemblance.
There is. There absolutely is resemblance right there.
Yes, yes. So, we have quite a few photos of him in the family, and we're just so proud, of our heritage, that, our great-grandfather, really was the first person to organize the organization as it's known today. And, fun story with that is when they came to him in the very, very beginning and asked him to be the first Chief Scout Executive, he agreed to do it just to help set it up for the first couple of years. And he enjoyed it so much, and, he was there for over 30 years at the helm of the Boy Scouts. So he's really, I don't believe there's been a Chief Scout Executive that has served as long as he has. You would know better than I would, Doug, but, being the first one, when he left after, creating the organization as we know it, it was different than today's organization, but the core base of it, the Boy Scout program itself, is very, very similar to the program today. And, it's lasted over all these years. And we're just, as a West family, we're just very, very proud of that.
Well, Brett, he was the Chief Scout Executive from 1911 through 1943, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And during that time, some really transformational things occurred, obviously, in the formative years of the Boy Scouts. And he was, he had a different title earlier, but he became the first Chief Scout Executive. And at that time, they formulated things like the values that are inspired. They formed the Scout Oath and the Scout Law. He particularly, I think, added the last 3 points of the Scout Law: brave, clean, and reverent.
Reverent,
and also,
was very important. That's correct.
He was also the chief during the time in 1933 upon the organization of Cub Scouting. Tell us about that, if you have any perspective on those.
Well, first of all, you have to understand, Doug, that I never met James E. West. He died, unfortunately, before I was born. So I don't have any direct knowledge of things he said or thought. These are just family lore stories that have been handed down through the years. But kind of humorous, because Cub Scouting is such a fabulous and large program. But it's my understanding through family, telling me, other family members telling me that he was not a fan of Cub Scouts. He thought that, I think the line that I've heard that he used is, Cub Scouts will ruin Boy Scout. Cub Scouts will ruin a Boy Scout, meaning he was concerned that it was too young for the program, and that some kids, which is he's actually even today, it's true, would be burnt out of it at a young age and not going, go through Cub Scouts, and that's plenty for them, and not go into Boy Scouts. And Boy Scouts is where he thought, that's where the meat and potatoes of the program was in terms of building character and whatnot. So he wasn't a fan of Cub Scouts. And he apparently tried to keep it off the books or off the program during his tenure there. And although after he left, it certainly grew to something quite large.
Well, and it certainly did during the time of the last 10 years or so of his tenure as the chief, where Cub Scouting really grew to become, in these days, the largest program that we have. And he was also instrumental in really ensuring that Scouting was diverse in terms of different religions being involved, and that source of reverency, the reverent point of the Scout Law, was something particularly important to him, I know, as well.
Yeah, no, and it's terrific that the Boy Scouts, have left reverent in their program. As you know, in today's political culture, issues surrounding religion usually are avoided for good purposes, but at the same point, back to his thinking was that it's fundamental to the character of youth is that they have, some understanding of some God.
He had he was a contemporary of President Theodore Roosevelt, and good friends with him. He was an associate of Norman Rockwell, the famous painter. Tell us any stories you might know from the family about his relationship with those folks.
Well, most people familiar with Scouting are familiar with the Norman Rockwell painting series, which is just a fabulous collection of paintings of different Scouts doing different things. And James E. West is the one who commissioned Rockwell to do that series. When he commissioned Rockwell was a young painter without, he didn't have a big name at the time. So it was so he discovered Norman Rockwell, if you will. But anyways, a funny story that's been handed down in the family is, again, now remember, he's my great-grandfather. So my father, so he would have been the grandson of James E. West, who knew James E. West well because he was alive during his lifetime while he wasn't in mine. So he was fairly close to his grandfather. And when my mother and my father got engaged, my father brought my mother to James E. West to introduce her. This is back in the days. This is in the early 60s when you met a gal, Doug, and you dated for a few weeks, and then you decided to get married, and you were married a month later. So I think that was one of, my dad brought his new fiancee to James E. West to introduce her. And he thought that was just wonderful. And at the time, this would have been in the early 60s, the entire Norman Rockwell Boy Scout collection was in the attic of James E. West. And when my father brought my mother, they went to his house, and James E. West said, "Oh, this is fabulous. Why don't you go up into the attic and you take 2 of those Norman Rockwell paintings, and that'll be your engagement present." And so my mom and dad went up to the attic, and there was just all stacked up there. They weren't in the 60s worth anything like they are, they're priceless today. So they went through them all, and they found 2 that they really liked, and they grabbed them out of the stack and brought them downstairs and said to James E. West, "These are the 2 that we would like, and thank you so much." And he says, "Great." And so when they left, they were, because these are big, everyone's seen the originals, they're huge, and they couldn't get 2 of them into the car, literally, when they were leaving. So they left one behind and put it back in the attic because they just couldn't fit it. And they drove away. And that painting is called "A Scout is Helpful." And here is just a printout of it I have. So hopefully you folks recognize this painting. So anyways, as my childhood, when I grew up in the late 60s, early, through the 70s and 80s, this painting hung in our living room. And, it was I didn't understand. I was just a young boy at the time. You know, the value then, now it's a Norman Rockwell painting. And my parents always told me, you know, you can't go near it, you can't touch it. Of course, what does a young child do who's told he can't touch it? I would touch it all the time when my parents weren't looking. I even in my worst of being mischievous, I actually threw tennis balls at it. So yeah,
Wow.
it is a worth, you know, a priceless piece of art. But anyways, fortunately, this painting now, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, is not with the Boy Scout collection down in Dallas. It's actually at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. That's where it resides to this day. But that painting, you know, is near and dear to my heart because it was the forbidden fruit I wasn't allowed to even touch as a child.
That is a famous Rockwell Boy Scout painting. A scout
Oh,
is
one more on that. My dad tells it, and I'm not sure which painting it was when he was a child. So going back a generation now, he had one of the Rockwells hanging in his bedroom. And again, they weren't worth anything at those times. And unfortunately, you know, being in a child's room and, you know, people moving and whatnot, it was actually destroyed. That particular Rockwell, which is just a tragedy, but you know, it just goes to show that, you know, how things evolved where, you know, these were just, you know, worthless to, oh, they're worth a little bit, so why don't you take it as an engagement gift, to today they're priceless. You know, so unfortunately, you know, none of them are in the family anymore. They're all either with the Boy Scouts at the National Museum or with the Norman Rockwell Museum in Massachusetts.
We're joined today by the great grandson of the first Chief Scout executive, James E. West. His name is Brett West. Brett, this has been great. Thank you for being a part of this. Brett, I have to ask you, you're a very successful businessman in the field of internet communications and advertising. What do you have to share with our scouting family who struggles with putting the outing back in scouting and trying to participate in it online and at home?
Well, I think we're all going through a transformation right now. You know, this thing called Zoom that only 2 months ago, very few people heard of. You know, we all have been glued to our cell phones too much, but now those cell phones and our electronic appliances and devices are much more important, and so much that's our only means of communicating with anyone outside the immediate family. So I think we're going to, you know, this renaissance of the electronic communication, and the whole COVID experience has really taken it from something that was fun and the younger generation were using much more so than older generations, but now it's mainstream. You know, it is now as important as, you know, the family telephone was only 20, 30 years ago, hanging in the kitchen or wherever it was. It is the main item for communication. Unfortunately, you know, until things change a little bit, you know, right now this is it. You know, we're stuck at home, and if I want to talk to someone other than my wife and kids, I've got to go to this computer and to you know, talk to other folks. But so while, you know, COVID is horrible and what it's doing, it's also redefining the way we communicate, and you know, it's so it has some positives, and it's certainly been a good backup during this period. I'm not sure if that was your question, Doug, but
Yeah, that was the question, and a great answer. We are, I think, everyone is hopeful for the time fairly soon that we can get back in the outdoors. And when we think of the legacy of the Boy Scouts of America that people like James E. West founded and really established early on, we think of the outdoors aspect, camping, hiking. We also think of those basic principles and values of our organization. So do you have anything to share, anything else related to James E. West and his perception on those values?
yeah, well, one thing that not a lot of people understand about James E. West was his story. James E. West was an orphan as an infant, and he spent his entire childhood living in an orphanage in Washington, D.C. And in fact, he contracted polio, which, you know, was like COVID today. Everyone was terrified of it, and it was a serious problem. So if you had to get polio, you know, a lot of those people became completely paralyzed or partially paralyzed. He was fortunate that his polio sickness didn't paralyze him that much. I mean, he had a limp, as most polio sufferers had, but on a, you know, on the scale, it can be really bad or not so bad. He was on the not so bad side, thank God. But anyways, he growing up in an orphanage, and then he, through just hard work, he put himself through college, he put himself through law school. And then when he endeavored to creating his career, having had such a horrible childhood, living and growing up in an orphanage with polio, so they wouldn't even allow him to go out back and play ball with the boys. He was, you know, stuck inside doing, you know, the chores with the girls and learning to sew and learning those types of things. So, you know, he was greatly scarred by that. And he has a whole autobiography where he goes into that great detail. But anyways, he dedicated his life, Doug, to doing what he could to ensure that no child had as bad of a childhood as he had, because he felt strongly that a childhood, as he said, and when he wrote his autobiography, his office was on one of the top floors of the Empire State Building. And a famous line from there was, he talks about the foundation of the Empire State Building, how significant and deep and strong that is to hold that giant, enormous building. And he views, you know, scouting and youth as the foundation for people. And, you know, this program, he wanted to build that foundation as strong as the foundation holding the Empire State Building. Thus, he dedicated his life to that. So Boy Scouts was by far his biggest success and his biggest mission. But, you know, he was also worked for the Roosevelt administration, Theodore Roosevelt. And the child court system that's in place today, Theodore Roosevelt asked him to create that, and he did. So the whole child court system. He was also involved, and this is at a local level in the DC area, with the YMCA. So again, here's just a fabulous, you know, rags to riches story of a man who came from nothing and not only, you know, built him, you know, created a lot, but he did it in a way that he was trying to protect future generations from experiencing the childhood that he experienced, which is just, you know, what a terrific man.
And an amazing legacy that he has left to the Boy Scouts of America and the millions and millions of families who have benefited from its programs over the years and will continue for years to come, going from an orphan to become the Chief Scout Executive for more than 30 years. In fact, this is a Time Magazine picture when he was on the cover of Time Magazine from the early 40s, and certainly continues to be prominent in our organization.
Yeah.
Brett West from the Adirondacks, great-grandson of James E. West. Thank you for being a part of this program today and for your inspiring words for our scouting family. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, again, thank you, Doug, for inviting me on this new program that you're putting together. I've always been a big fan of yours, and I think Stone Soup is going to be fabulous, and I think everyone who's watching should subscribe and send it to all your friends and family and have them subscribe, because this is good stuff.
Good stuff. Brett, thanks again. We hope everybody has a great day and a great scouting adventure, including during this pandemic and at the time when we can put the outing back in scouting. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doug. Great seeing you again.
Great to see you, Brett.